Okay, this week's readings were about self care. And I think this is a really important topic, and mostly because I 100% suck at self care. And I think it happens to a lot of caregivers. I'm a mom, and so I've always put specifically my children first, but I also have a really large Catholic family, and so it's kind of ingrained early on that, that care for others is important and that self care is selfish, and selfish is bad. It's even a sin. And so I was really excited to get to these readings. I've been looking forward to it all semester. I really enjoyed them, all three of them, even though there was a little bit of disconnection with some of them. And I learned a lot. So the first one was called The Politics of Conspicuous Displays of Self Care. So I thought this article was really interesting because it talked about how trendy self-care, that term self-care has gotten, and how it's becoming normalized to show people that you're doing self-care, whether it's spas or eating healthy or working out or whatever, and it's hashtag self-care, and self-care is self-love, and those things are true. I see value in kind of those public displays, the normalizing of self-care as something healthy, because I was brought up in a place and in a time where it definitely wasn't. And that's where the discussion of the term of selfish comes in. And I started thinking while I was reading this article, why do we only equate selfish with, what does it have a negative connotation? Selfish, um, you know, about self. And it doesn't have to have a negative connotation. Self care and self love are selfish. They're about the self, and there's nothing wrong with that. The the now trope that flight attendants say when you take off in a plane in the event of an emergency, put your own mask on first so that you can help others. It really is. It does drill down to, you can't care for others if you're not properly caring for yourself, and that means all parts of yourself. So while I don't feel the need to display my self care, because most of mine isn't physical either, it's more intellectual or spiritual. I do think it's important that we change the perception of self-care as a negative one. The second article was James Baldwin. Let's see, what was that? Self-care is an act of political warfare. Okay, that one's really interesting because I hadn't thought about conceptually. The writer has a totally different viewpoint. The writer's a trans person and has multiple intersectionalities of queer and race and all of these different things that they have to deal with. And so self-care becomes really a pushback on societal forces. And that's what being an act of political warfare is. And the author started by talking about, I think we all remember the day that Trump was elected into office, and now what are we going to do for the next 4 years? And all of us that had joked about, I'm moving to Canada, it's like, do we really move to Canada? What do we do with this thing? But so the concept of this was self-care as being an opportunity to push back against socially constructed norms. And that's when the conversation about bell hooks came into place. And bell hooks, I'm going to read it because she's very famous for this line, and it's in her own too. Imperialist, white, supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. So then that rolls into the third reading, which was a bell hooks interview, which they started specifically talking about that phrase and why she uses it as one whole construct, and not talking about those things individually. It always seemed before I read this article, her interview, it always seemed to me too carefully constructed, and it seemed really like on the offense. And I guess in some ways it is, and in some ways that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I had a harder while I really enjoyed the article, I had a harder time connecting it to the other 2 points of reading, except that the author in the second one had used it as a device to show how pushing against oppressive societal norms is an act of self-care. So it just went more into her interview went more into some of her idealism, and so it was really enjoyable, and so it gave more context to the second article. But as far as a self-care article, I wouldn't have um, I wouldn't have selected that article if someone said find me an article about self-care. I wouldn't have selected that one specifically, even though without having read that second article first. So all in all, I really enjoyed the readings this week. It gave me some new perspective on self-care and how to continue to try to get past the idea that self-care is selfish in a negative way. Thanks.